Oh, this is very appropriate music. I'm talking about the mainstream media and how they have also been playing a big role in trying to slap down what they see as the evil white culture in this country. You know, you bring up any of our founding fathers and they scream slaveholder, slaveholder, slaveholder. You bring up the Bible and they say, "Oh, mean spirited homophobe." They have the freedom to report and whatever they want in this country, and yet they're the biggest abusers of that. I find it's absolutely amazing that they hate a country that allows some of them to do very very well. We should point out all of the national pundits, none of them are starving. In fact, they write books, most of which are pretty pedestrian, but they make a good deal out of writing those books. And they bloviate on TV and they claim, oh, the American people believe, except they don't really know any real Americans other than the local dry cleaner who they abuse whenever they go in. Mike Barnacle. He's a columnist out of Boston, Massachusetts, and one of the TV talking heads over on the far left. Also a plagiarist. He had some problems with that a few years ago. In other words, he likes to lift what other people say. But that didn't deter him from continuing on television and writing newspaper columns. If he'd been a conservative, he probably would have had to quit and go live under a bridge somewhere. He was speaking on Bloomberg Politics. This is a TV show that he is one of the revolving hosts on. And he's speaking with another writer by the name of John Heilemann. When Barnacle suggests that Republicans are somehow, especially out in Iowa, and if you probably go anywhere between the two coasts, he says essentially they're a bunch of toothless rubes. And he doesn't want to have anything to do with them.
Trump, Carson, Cruz, Fiorina up to about 53%.
53%.
54, something like that.
So that means that if I lived in Iowa, I would want to know where each of those members of that 53% were. I would want to live as far away from them as possible. Because there is something seriously wrong with the Republican Party if those people are combined have a majority of the voters.
Well, I'll tell you another thing that's going on with Ben Carson, at least. Again, we looked at this in the poll.
He's a nice man.
He is a nice man. He is a brilliant, talented neurosurgeon.
Wait a second. Why is it that there's something wrong with the Republican Party and those knuckle-dragging, toothless rubes in Iowa because they support Carson, Trump, and Fiorina? Why? Well, we don't support killing babies in the womb. We Democrats do, and that's a good thing, see? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we like to go over and have same-sex relations with our good friends and get married to them in same-sex relations, and that's a good thing. You see? Those rubes in Iowa, they still read the Bible, and for crying out loud, they still think the country could be great. Gosh, if only Bernie Sanders could go out there and give them the what for. So because you back or support these people, he doesn't, I'm glad I'm not their neighbor. Well, you're a plagiarist. You're also ugly, butt ugly, we should point out. He's got this bald head, and it looks like there's little fuzzy things all over it, and growth all over the top of his head. Being a plagiarist, he's the next closest thing to being a liar. Likely is that too. Do you think that the people in Iowa would want to have anything to do with him? I don't think so. They are so out of touch with middle America, and they have tried to browbeat us into believing what they believe, and it only makes them angry when we refuse to cooperate. They go off the deep end about all of this. Speaking of Trump, though, the number of people who are still angry that he is still having a strong showing in polls. One thing to note, when they say Carson is polled even with him in Iowa, Trump didn't actually lose any support. Carson actually took it from some of the other people. He took it from people like Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush is a squish. If you get Jeb Bush in, think about it. Jeb Bush, he's from the same wing of the Republican Party that gives you Mitch McConnell and gives you, what's his name? John Boehner, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Boehner, by the way, Sidney Blumenthal, who's the consigliere to the Clinton family, or consigliere, however that's pronounced. Speaking of a guy who's probably, covered in all sorts of boils and warts and the like, but he nailed it pretty well the other day when that email was released from some years ago about John Boehner when he said other Republicans feel that he's a louche. He's a louche, an alcoholic, and lazy. What does louche mean? Well, I'm trying to find a good definition. If you ever saw the movie My Favorite Year, starring Peter O'Toole, O'Toole plays this burned out, drunken movie star, based on some of the big stars of the 1930s. In particular, a fellow by the name of Errol Flynn. That's who he's playing the character on. But everyone seems to like him, even though you can't work with him. He's late for work. He's often drunk on the set. That's what Alush is. And so that's what John Boehner is apparently viewed as. And now we want to add Jeb Bush. The establishment still is trying to sell Jeb Bush. Even at the Washington Times, Donald Trump is being criticized today by Donald Lambro, saying all he does is talk about illegal immigration, and that's not the main issue Americans are concerned about. Well, let me tell you something. When it comes down to the economy, illegal immigration plays a huge part in our concerns. If you don't have a job, and somebody else came here illegally and is undercutting you and taking the job, to kind of paraphrase Ronald Reagan, a recession is when your neighbor loses his job. The depression is when you lose yours. And remember what he said about that? He said recovery is when Jimmy Carter loses his. I'll feel the same way about Barack Obama. We've got more coming up, including some of your telephone calls. Bill Colley, Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We've been mentioning, of course, we have usually a lot of people out in the woods in the next coming couple of months because of various hunting seasons that will be opening up. And we've been telling people about high desert meat processing, where they process one animal at a time. What you bring in is what you get back. Darren Van Horn, owner of High Desert Meat Processing in Twin Falls, Idaho, has over 30 years' experience in the meat business. And you can visit High Desert Meat Processing on Facebook, and there are reviews of customers. It was just great a couple of weeks ago when someone called in and said, you know what, it's everything that you've been telling us it is. We'd like to hear more of that. Give High Desert Meat Processing a call for all of your wild game and domestic processing needs, 734-9949. High Desert Meat does in-house smoking. Nothing gets shipped out. Specialty meats such as jerky, pepperoni, salami, summer sausage, breakfast sausage, kielbasa, brats, Polish dogs, hot dogs, and much more. USDA approved. Darren works closely with local beef growers and their programs to ensure quality meat. 734-9949. It's 9:44. Mike Gallagher will be along in about 6 minutes on the program, which is Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com with Bill Colley. The .com, the website, newsradio1310.com means you can listen to us anywhere all over the world. You just go to the website, and over there on the upper right-hand corner is a button that reads Listen Live. Click on that, and you're in business. Our telephone number, if you'd like to reach the program, 736-0300. You can also email me, bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com, bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. I have a great email today, but I had a couple of good emails. In fact, people asking me not to share their names, but I do hope that I can at least get to the emails in the next segment of the program, just to give you a rundown, because some of these are very funny, although in a sad sort of way, but they really tell us about the state of affairs here in really the country and in Idaho as well. You're up next. You're on Top Story with Bill Colley.
Good morning, Bill.
Morning.
I just wanted you to think about the icons that we have in America, and so many of these things are being torn apart and taken down. And think about what ISIS is doing to the antiquities on over in the Middle East, and how they're taking apart what has been 2,000 plus years of history.
Absolutely. The Taliban did the same. In fact, before 9/11, the Taliban were blasting all sorts of giant Buddha statues with cannons, and then they'd jump up and down as if they were having some sort of sexual experience.
That's correct. So what are we doing to a young country that's less than 250 years old? What are we doing to our history? Anyway, food for thought. You're right on. Talk to you again.
Hey, thank you much for the call. Yeah, and you eliminate that history, then you can teach a new history. Kampuchea, which was what Cambodia became under the Pol Pot regime back in the 70s, they eliminated all history, including killing 2 million people. If you wore glasses, you were considered suspect, and so you were killed. If you knew a second language, you were killed. That way they thought they could start all over and claim that the Earth had just started, and it was year zero. It didn't work. But apparently there are people in this country who think they've got to emulate that. You're up next, and you're on the air on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com.
Good morning, Bill. Reference immigration. If Congress had the testicles to defund Planned Parenthood, they could use all that money to bring all the Christians over there that are in the way of ISIS over here to the country, stop the Muslims that they're presently bringing in, and at least we know part of what these Christian immigrants would think and do. I'll hear your response on the air.
Well, I thank you. Yeah, I think that it's true. I think that the Christians are a much better cultural fit. I mean, religion is part of our culture. The entire Western culture that was passed on from Europe and then into North America, and it comes from those Christian beliefs. Our laws are all based on that. And our language choices are based on that. You can't, so many sayings that we have in our everyday life that are biblical that we don't even realize, when we're saying them any longer, that they have a biblical basis. And yet to try to shoehorn in another culture versus one that would be almost, well, not seamless, but a lot easier fit. This makes no sense whatsoever. You're up next. It's 9:48. Good morning.
Oh, good morning, Bill. Hey, all these trillions of dollars that America's supposedly borrowed, I got a bad feeling a lot of this has been put right back to the United Nations, and I personally think they're building their own army, and we're paying for it, and the money's going all over the world under different programs, and we just totally armed ISIS in Iraq. 400 million cash in a bank, all of our tanks and stuff to be used against us. Good grief. Why doesn't somebody look into this stuff?
Yeah,
UN programs are going to come right back, and we're financing it. And this we're going to have UN peacekeepers in this country before we know what happened.
I'm not. You know what? I think that it would have sounded ridiculous 20 years ago. But if we end up having, first of all, the UN would have to take away our guns because I don't think most of our troops would do it. But if we have what you might call a big civil unrest, a period of civil unrest in this country, yeah, you could see them saying, you know what, we're going to need the United Nations help. And then the blue helmets will fan out and go door to door and start the gun confiscation. Good luck, by the way. I don't think it'll work. I thank you much for the call, sir. We've got a break coming. Well, it's not a break. Mike Gallagher is part of the program. So we'll just make that clear. Mike Gallagher is one of those people in talk radio and in newspaper columnist business who's got he's of right mind. And he's brought to you each weekday exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. You can reach them by dialing this number, 736-6563. Yeah, you remember that. Don't hurt the feelings of the bums and winos. Got it? 9:54, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And I mentioned this a little earlier. I had a couple of emails the last couple of days that I thought were worth mentioning. A fellow writes, Bill, your topic of late, refugees, and a side topic involving illegal aliens, prompted a few events I recently experienced. A friend of mine was a manager, he writes, at a Section 8 housing facility. One day I asked a few questions about a Muslim family who recently moved into a unit. There were two vehicles parked at the dwelling, a BMW M1 and a Ford Explorer, both in good service condition. It turns out they were refugees, receiving in excess of $18,000 a year for about 18 months, plus next to zero rent during their resettlement period. The writer says, traveling through the Wood River Valley a few weeks ago, I stopped in Bellevue to refuel my driver. He says, emerging from my vehicle, I was the only one who spoke English and the plaza's refueling islands. Stopping at an unspecified financial institution, I entered the lobby to conduct a transaction. While waiting in a short line, I was the only person who spoke English, including the teller. Trip to Atkinson's Grocery, he writes, in Bellevue again, waiting in a short line, a well-dressed Hispanic woman ahead of me. I made a few observations. She had a full cart of food, paid for with a SNAP card. After paying cash for my meager purchases, I happened to follow the same woman out, where she loaded her late-model Jeep Grand Cherokee with our purchases. But he said, I made a few mental notes prior to seating myself back into my 20-year-old car. So, yeah, we're paying for it all. And to what benefit? Oh, don't worry. When we bankrupt you, you can get a line for your food stamps, too. Once again, it's not sustainable. And I had another email that I read this morning when I came into the work. What does the religion of peace teach about? Now, this is from a website, and the writer says he mailed this to a great many state legislators. He said he's had replies from 3. You know how that is. Dear constituent, thank you very much for sharing your views, which I don't share. We here in Boise have to work very hard. You don't know how hard we actually work. We work harder than any farmer or any man who ever carried a backpack through a mountain pass in Afghanistan. Yes, we do. We work hard, and we probably work harder than any of you who need 2 jobs to make ends meet. And in fact, if you knew what the situation really was, you wouldn't feel this way. Why, after all, we took a junket over to the Middle East and we stopped in the Crimea and spent 2 weeks on the beach contemplating and considering the plight of the refugees. And we got sunburned. And then we had to come back home and work hard again in the legislature. So, we do understand your concerns, but we're not really concerned about those. And so you can just go jump off a hill. Oh, by the way, next year we're up for re-election, and we will gladly hear any of your complaints then. We'll nod our heads and act as if we're concerned, and then expect you to vote for us on Election Day. 9:57. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. So we got 3 responses, but pretty much everyone else didn't reply. And the responders, we should point out, thank you very much, constituent. I have deep-sixed your letter. We dropped it into the shredder today because we like to be good about recycling. I am sure that you would like to be good about recycling as well. If you would like to learn more about recycling rather than resettlement, please go to my website. I have introduced a bill about recycling, and you can learn more about it. Rush Limbaugh is coming up next following news at 10 o'clock. Bill Colley saying, hey, sayonara for today. God willing, if the creek don't rise, they'll let me jump back in here and do this all over again tomorrow between 8 and 10 o'clock. Sean Hannity the Sean Hannity program following news from Fox at 1 o'clock. Glenn Beck following news at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Dave Ramsey tonight, Coast to Coast overnight. Benita Baeza tomorrow morning with AM Idaho. And then, if you can stand it, another 2 hours of me.